We had Lake Speed Jr. in studio, a certified lubrication specialist from Joe Gibbs Racing's Driven Oil. Now, Lake has motor oil running through his veins, passed down from his father, respected NASCAR driver Lake Speed Sr. We talked about how to choose the proper driven oil for your vehicle, the API index standards, and how driven oil is formulated. We broke it down into a three-part series. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to choose the proper driven oil for your particular application. Okay, so now that we've kind of touched a little bit on our oils, let's talk about the different types of oils like we talked about, the air-cooled. That you should not ever break in a performance engine on a normal oil. You guys have a solution for that as well.
Exactly, yeah. We have a purpose-built break-in oil. Again, back to our favorite word, balance, right? This oil has a very low level of detergent and dispersant, very high level of ZDP in it. Yeah, so you have the zinc, the phosphorus, the sulfur you need to establish the anti-wear film. It's kind of like putting down primer before you put down paint.
Right.
And that's the same thing. So, okay, I need break-in oil to establish my anti-wear film. Okay, then I can go to, a full synthetic oil for my high-performance street car, or I can go to my race oil for my race car, or I can go to my hot rod oil for my hot rod car.
Sure.
Each of them has a different balance based on the different needs and applications of the engines. Perfect example, hot rod car typically sits. They don't do a lot of driving. They do a lot of sitting.
Right.
And then when they go to the show, they do a lot of idling around and all this.
Right.
So you get more fuel dilution, you get more storage. So a hot rod oil it needs the high level of zinc for the old school style motor, but it also needs rust inhibitors.
Right.
Because you are loading the crankcase full of fuel.
Right.
It does sit in the garage for extended periods of time. So hot rod oils are high zinc with rust inhibitor.
Sure.
Where your race motor, you're going to the racetrack every weekend and you're running the heck out of it, and oil's coming out and it's getting hot enough to boil the fuel off. So you don't need the rust inhibitor package as high a level for the race oil. You just need a lower level to maintain so it doesn't get rusty inside.
Right.
But it has more friction modifier, more extreme pressure agent in it.
Right.
Because you're running it harder. So it's a lot of the same chemicals, same base oils. You're just changing the balance, tweaking it for each application to get the most protection for each application.
Well, and that's real important. And if the hot rod guys, like I have some of my cars, literally, probably have not started they haven't been started in a year. And the first thing that I'm going to do before I start that engine is I'm going to change the oil before it even gets fired up. And that's because the heat and all that, when the motor gets warm, it actually burns all that fuel that's sitting in there and all those, and the acids that are in there just kind of start eating things apart. And if an engine's not run, if the oil's not used, then it definitely needs to be changed, and that's because everything starts to break down.
Oh, exactly. We tell people all the time, don't store the car on used oil. When you put it away in the garage at the end of the fall for the winter, put fresh oil in it.
Yep.
If you put in like a hot rod oil that has the rust inhibitors, run the motor for 5 minutes, get it hot enough to get the stuff out, shut it off, then don't go out there and crank it every other week.
Yeah, just put it away.
Just put it away and let it sit. It's going to be fine.
Right.
It's the firing it up every few weeks in the middle of the winter when it's cold. All you're doing is loading fuel.
And people typically do that. What they do is they don't get the engine up. They get it to the temperatures at normal operating temperature on the water, but the oil has never gotten hot.
Yeah, exactly. Now, most people don't realize that if the water temperature's gotten to 180, the oil's not there yet.
Not even close.
Yeah, and until it gets to about 200, none of that water is boiling off. So all you're doing is loading it up.
That's right.
And the fuel and that water contamination is the enemy of not only your oil, but also your engine. You want to get that stuff out of there. So at least, good oils used the right way are going to give the end user what they're hunting for in terms of protection for their motor.
Is there a rule of thumb on what the oil temperature needs to be before you really pounce on your car hard, or before the oil starts to break down? What is kind of a rule of thumb with that, or is there one?
Well, it depends upon the application.
Sure.
Right? What your operating oil temperature on a circle track car is going to be very different than a drag race car.
Sure.
Where your endurance racing, circle track, road course, they're going to be more similar. Right. And what we tell people there is you want to get the oil, say 180 degrees Fahrenheit, before you really stand on it.
Sure.
Because that way you're getting the oil in the proper flow rate.
Right.
Ideally, you'd like the oil temperature to run about 220 degrees. That's hot enough to boil out any water, any fuel, anything in the system, you can boil it out. It'll evaporate out of the system.
Then the oil does its job instead of being contaminated by whatever you put in there, the fuel, the water, whatever.
Exactly. But it's not so hot that you're actually shortening the oil life.
Breaking down the oil.
Every 20 degrees Fahrenheit or so, the oil life is cut in half.
Wow. And that starts at what point?
Well, typically once you get to about, say, 200 degrees, once you start going up from there, every 20-degree increment, you're shortening your oil life. Now, at, say, 220 degrees, the oil life is maybe several hours of track running.
Of abuse, right.
Of abuse. But if I go from 200 to 300, well, the oil can maybe still handle it, but my oil life is not going to be where near as long.
Things are going to start breaking down. The compounds are going to start coming apart in the oil, and it's just going to basically come apart.
Right. And now, the one nice thing about running, say, a full synthetic oil for your track day car is the full synthetic can handle over 320 degrees Fahrenheit. The bad news is your bearings can't.
Right. Everything else is going away.
The oil will actually still be protecting when your bearings just give up. We can't handle the heat that's melting.
Right.
But the good rule of thumb is if you can keep it to 220 degrees, you're doing really well in terms of ideal scenario.
Sure.
Drag racing is different because the engines typically run much colder.
Sure.
So you're going to try to match up the right viscosity of oil.
Yep.
Basically, the rule of thumb is, oil is a lot like maple syrup.
Sure.
It gets thinner when it gets hotter, and it gets thicker when it gets colder.
Right.
So the colder you run your oil, the lower the SAE grade you need to have to maintain the proper oil flow.
Right.
The 4 R's of lubrication are the right oil, right place, right time, right amount.
Okay, there you go.
The oil itself is only one of the 4.
Right.
So if I get a good quality oil, I still need to get enough of the oil where it needs to be, when it needs to be.
Right.
And that's part of the whole equation. So, you want to make sure that in a low temperature application, you have enough oil flow, getting to all the proper parts. And that's why you say with a circle track deal or road race car, you want to get the oil warm enough. 180 degrees is going to ensure that you're getting enough oil flow before you really stand on it and take the engine to 9,000 RPM.
Right. And that's one of the things that the drag racers, cars, 2 things I know about vehicles is, one, they always run best right before they explode.
Yep.
And they always run better right when they're first cold. I mean, people when there's not a lot of heat to heat the air, people when you go to the drag strip, those guys push them up the staging lanes on purpose because they don't want a bunch of heat soak under the hood.
Yes.
And they never get the oil hot enough.
Right.
So choosing the right oil and the right viscosity is real critical for those guys.
Oh, exactly. And a lot of guys look at the NHRA Pro Stock guy, perfect example. It's a 500 cubic inch engine that makes over 1,500 horsepower.
Right.
And they push these things up there, and they see these guys pour in, a straight 0 grade motor oil, and they're like, oh my God, that stuff's like water. What they don't realize is that oil never gets over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
So at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that straight 0 grade motor oil
is exactly what it needs to be.
Is exactly the same viscosity, actually measured flow, as a 20W50 is at 240 degrees in your track day car.
Right.
It's just that no one's seeing that oil's that thin. Again, back to maple syrup. It gets thicker when it gets colder, thinner when it gets hotter.
Right. Well, and that leads me to another thing. How about the W in everybody thinks that stands for weight. It doesn't stand for weight at all.
Stands for winter.
Stands for winter. It's always stood for winter.
Yes, exactly.
And that tells you that's how easy it's going to flow when you start that car up in a very cold environment, 0 degrees. In fact, isn't 0 degrees what they measure that at? Is that the number?
Yeah, a 0W will allow safe cranking down as low as negative 35 degrees below 0.
Right.
That's really cold.
Yeah.
If you're in Canada, that makes sense.
Right.
So the 0W, 05, 10 weight, all those things, that's all about low temperature application.
And the first number, that's what they're talking about.
Yes.
And my understanding was, did they measure that at 0 degrees? I know that it is capable of a lot cooler than that, and it will still flow. But I think the original standard was like 0 degrees or something like that, or
it starts off at negative 4 degrees.
Okay, negative 4.
So at negative 4 is where they begin, and they keep going progressively colder and colder and colder. Will the engine still crank with that oil?
Gotcha.
And that's what it is. That's why I call it a winter. That's why the W says. It says winter. It's winter cold cranking ability. So a 25W whatever will crank at -4 degrees, basically zero, right?
Right.
When you get down to a 0W, it's cranking all the way down to -35.
Wow. Okay. All right. Very good. And so multi-vis oils, multi-viscosity oils. I've not been a huge fan of that in my race cars because I know what my environment is going to be, so I choose a specific weight for the specific environment based on the oil that I know my engine needs. Does that, and I know that today the technology is so much better today.
Yes.
So that's not a big deal on the racing thing at all. You can run a multi-vis oil and it's perfectly fine. In fact, it probably helps in some areas now.
Yeah, the technology today is way better than it was even 15 years ago when it comes to the multi-viscosity oils. Again, the number before the W is the winter cold cranking ability. The number after the W is your summer high temperature flow rating.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And it used to be that if you had a multi-visc oil, you had all these polymer additives in the oil that weren't necessarily the most stable under high heat and high load.
Yeah.
Sounds like racing to me. Yeah. Where it was okay in a passenger car application, but not so much in a racing application.
Right.
The polymers would break down and fall apart, which meant your oil film fell apart and broke down, which meant your oil pan had a big hole in it.
Yeah, and that's 25, 30 years ago, oils, if you didn't change your oil every X number of miles, you'd end up pulling the valve cover off and it was full of ash and all this stuff. That was all those polymers that they put in there breaking down. And so that's why it was that was, and I learned that from my father, of course, who was, racing when I was, I think I was at my first racetrack, I was 3 weeks old. He told me, straight weight, son. Don't go with a multi-vis in a race car because you're just going to have problems. And they did that. The polymers are what kind of broke down in that multi-vis oil. Exactly.
And what's been fortunate is actually for the racing guys, we've actually benefited from the development on the street side of turbochargers. And basically, small displacement engines with turbochargers are extremely popular in Europe.
Sure.
Right. Europe happens to be a fairly cold environment during the winter.
Right.
So they needed oils that would flow well, right? 0W again,
whatever,
or 5W. It would flow well, but could handle the heat and the load of the turbos.
Sure.
As a result, the additive manufacturers have developed new, more advanced, science additive packages that have polymers that are shear stable, that handle the heat. So now, racing and performance guys, we can tap into that technology, utilize synthetic base oils that can handle the heat, that flow better. I mean, most people don't realize that a synthetic oil is actually naturally a multi-grade oil.
Right.
Without any additives.
With no add pack, right.
So I can start off with a synthetic base oil that makes me a multi-grade. I can add in these advanced shear stable polymers to even get better protection. And now I have a way better oil for my race car or my street performance car that was ever available before.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the different recommendations for different types of vehicles. Of course, you guys have an air-cooled oil.
Yes.
And so let's talk about what people should be looking into. Let's start with the sport compact guy that's got a 300 horsepower turbo Honda. What would be a good oil for that guy to that's got his little 2-liter with a big turbo on it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a couple of different options. Based on the engine bearing clearance, right?
Sure.
If you're running a factory bearing clearance, and say the engine calls for a 5W20 from the factory, right? And you don't change the bearing clearance and you put a turbo on it, well, the oil system's still designed for a 520, right? So you need a more shear stable style 520. So like the FR20, for example, full synthetic, high zinc, shear stable 520.
Okay.
Designed for motors that call for a 520 that are seeing boosted applications where you need that shear stable protection.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is if you haven't changed clearances, if you're not running race car clearances, if you're still running your factory bottom end, you should stick with that factory weight recommendation.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't say weight.
I do it myself all the time.
That factory recommendation on the oil on the oil blend that they're looking for.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we tell people if you've got factory oiling system, factory bearing clearances, run the factory viscosity grade they've specified.
Okay.
But don't run an off-the-shelf motor oil.
Right.
Because most of the times you've added this turbo, you put a bigger camshaft in it.
Sure.
So now you need an oil that has the ZDP in it, and that's why we developed these oils, because we know there's a ton of guys out there, putting LS engines in their drift cars.
Oh, yeah.
their track day in,
Absolutely.
their Porsches or their Audis and stuff,
Right.
where you need at higher zinc oil for the bigger turbo, for the more aggressive camshaft, but they still have factory oiling systems, so you need factory viscosity grades, which is why they came out with a 530, a 520, a 540 that gives you factory viscosity grades with
With the protection.
Yes, exactly.
And the performance side of it. Okay, so let's go back just for a second with your break-in oil. How long, let's say I'm breaking in my new car, I just put a new camshaft in it, I got my 700 lift cam in my little 32
Yep.
Roadster. I'm breaking it on my break-in oil. How long do I leave that in?
Okay, here's our best practices. This is the best thing to do is do 30 minutes at 3,000 RPM, drop the oil, change the filter. And the reason for that is not that the oil's bad.
No.
It's because you're breaking in the motor, you're generating the most amount of particulate wear as all those little surface roughnesses all start to smooth out.
Sure.
You want to drain that contaminant out of the
Right away.
engine. Timken is the largest bearing manufacturer in the whole world.
Right.
You talk to Timken, 70% of the premature bearing failures are due to contamination, where people hadn't kept the system clean enough. Yeah, number one cause for premature bearing failure worldwide is contamination.
Okay.
So if you use a really good high quality oil, again, I'm putting down primer, but I'm going to change the oil, I'm going to change the filter after 30 minutes. I'm going to install more break-in oil.
Okay.
Because I'm still not done getting the rings of seat.
It's not.
It's
yeah.
not. We're not done
it's
yet.
Not even close.
You can use this for 500 miles after that.
Okay, the first 30 minutes, and also, I don't care how clean your clean room is. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
That dirt is still in there too. That sand acts like sandpaper, basically,
Oh, exactly.
inside the bearings and everything else. So you're going to get all that out of there. You're going to keep it clean, and that's going to do that. So after that, you put that in. Then you put another batch of break-in oil for the next 500 miles.
Yep.
And then you go to whatever you changed. Let's talk about, we've built a high-performance motor or high-performance engine, and we have tightened those clearances, or we loosened those clearances up, or
Yes.
tightened those clearances up, whichever direction you seem to go. What do we go? How do we decide on our oil then?
Okay, what you do is the looser the bearing clearance, the higher the viscosity grade you have to fill the gap.
Okay, sure, that
Right,
makes sense.
There's actually an engineering thing called the Strybeck curve, which is viscosity times speed divided by load.
Right.
Right, and one of the factors in that is bearing clearance. The wider that gap, the thicker the viscosity you have to maintain that bearing oil film thickness.
Right.
Right. So our recommendation is if you do 1,000ths per inch of journal diameter, then we actually in our catalog we have a listing. Here's your oil temperature. Here's your horsepower. That's your viscosity.
Okay,
It makes it real simple. And that's based on the SAE standard, which is 1,000ths per inch of journal diameter clearance. When you go looser than that, then you basically go up one viscosity grade.
Okay, all right.
If you go tighter than that, you go down one viscosity grade.
All right, very good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about specific oils. You guys actually blend specific oils for specific brands too. Like I see an LS oil here. Is that specifically designed for the LS engines on GM?
Yes, exactly. Each of these engines typically have their own unique issues, especially when you start trying to modify them. Volatility is a big issue with an LS motor, and even a modular motor, where these guys are running high RPM, high horsepower, putting a lot of boost to them, which makes the oil temperature go up
higher,
which
right.
makes the oil want to start to vaporize. And anybody who's built an LS motor probably has seen oil inside the intake manifold and wondered where that came from. Well, it's actually the oil evaporating and getting sucked through the positive crankcase ventilation system, the PCV system, and dumping it back in
into
the
the
intake
intake.
manifold.
Right.
So one of the ways of limiting that is to make the oil more thermally stable so it doesn't want to evaporate. Basically, it's called NOAC volatility, and where the current API standard is 15% volatility,
Right.
LS30, 5% volatility.
Because that meets the specific needs of the LS motors.
Exactly.
And that's a problem. When you start getting that oil in the top, it can create all kinds of problems.
Oh yeah, exhaust intake valve sticking because you get carbon deposits built up on it.
Right.
Detonation because you just get too much
Detonation.
carbon built up in the cylinder. So you're basically addressing the specific needs of specific engines.
Sure. Now, the FR20, this is, I'm assuming, Ford racing or for Ford stuff?
Ford modular, yeah, the 4.6 and 5.0 Ford modulars that call for the 520, right? They have the cam phasers, which is hydraulic, which a hydraulic system needs this much oil flow.
Right.
So if you again, haven't changed clearances, you haven't changed those things, but you've put a bigger manifold on it, you've swapped cams, exhaust change, supercharger, you still need the proper viscosity oil to make sure all the cam phases are working properly, that's shear stable. So this oil is an extremely shear stable, low volatility 5W20 for the specific needs of these high performance, high output modular motors.
Okay, and let's get into other things like gearboxes, transmissions, things like that. There are many loads that are put on those too. I'm assuming Joe Gibbs Racing did the same thing with gear oil. Obviously, there's 500 miles with a 4-speed, so they've done that too.
Oh yeah, we developed transmission fluid for 4-speed dog box. Because who's got one of those? Right. But we still have them in NASCAR, so we developed the fluid for them. We have fluid for Detroit Locker Ford 9-inch hypoids that need that. So very specific application. We need it. One of our most popular products is actually our power steering fluid because, NASCAR, you wouldn't think about it, but you're sawing that wheel all the time, and the underhood temperatures are really high. The amount of brake heat, radiant heat from the engine is extremely high, so you needed a very thermally stable power steering fluid. In fact, we have tons of Porsche guys who put it in because when they go track day the car, you can actually keep the oil temperature, the power steering system down, and you're not boil the fluid.
That's a huge deal on the Porsches too. I know that from experience. That definitely has a problem. That after quite a few laps out there on a track day, that power steering, you can actually feel it starting to tighten up a little bit and fade, just like you get brake fade with brake fluid and things like that too.
Yeah, the power steering fluid we have, the PSF, solves that problem.
Okay.
Because we would see the same thing. Watkins Glen, Sears Point, sawing a wheel all day long, you get yourself in trouble really quickly.
Well, Joe Gibbs Racing has done some a wonderful amount of testing for all of us hot rod guys, and we appreciate you guys bringing the oil out here. And one of the things that's really great is you've trained all of our guys here, our salespeople, so they absolutely know which one to recommend for which particular vehicle.
Exactly, yeah. Your guys know what's going on. Also, we have a lot of resources on the website where they can go to, drivenracingoil.com. They can check out all the training videos, all the tech stuff, pull it back in, and you guys have a lot of good links and stuff on your site as well.
Well, and so the important thing is that all oil is not alike, and anytime you go to your local parts store and you pick up a quart of oil, even if it's one of these, quote, racing oils that you can buy off the shelf, and there's a few of them out there, if you look on the back and it has an API number, not what you're looking for.
Exactly, yeah. You can put all the checkered flags and race cars you want to in your motor oil. If it's got an API donut on it, it's not a racing oil. And a lot of guys have said, motor oil is not motor oil anymore. Well, it's true. Yeah, I mean, it's just, fuel isn't fuel anymore, right? Pump gas has changed. Motor oils have changed.
Well, and you guys have addressed all the idiosyncrasies and all of the things that make the motor oil do what we need it to do for a number of specific applications.
Exactly. Again, back to the analogy of the fuel changing. Used to you had lead in the fuel and your old cars ran good on it, and then they went to unleaded fuel, then they had MTBE, and they took it out, and now you got ethanol, and it's all these various issues that are created as they change things chemically. We've just addressed the same issues that have come across because they've changed motor oil.
Well, and the good thing is, if you have an old 57 Chevy, they didn't have hardened valve seats. So when lead went away, it's now all the time, you got valve problems and things like that and valve guide problems. With motor oil, it's a little different. We can't go out and buy lead and put it in the gas, but you guys have answered the questions that we have for the old school hot rod guys for the motor oil.
Exactly. With our product line, all the additives you need for that application are already in the bottle. You don't have to go try to play chemist by saying, I'm going to go get this brand of oil, I'm going to go buy this guy's additive, and I'm going to try to mix it together to make something and hope it works. That's kind of like playing Russian roulette with your motor. Whether all those things do what they're supposed to do. And like you said, your experience in the lab, if you don't blend the things in at the right temperature, throwing it in, not going to do anything.
Well, they come apart.
It could be worse.
Yeah, they come apart. They come apart. Another thing that helps, that makes engine oils break down is not getting up to proper temperature like what we were talking about. So if you're doing a lot of short runs to the grocery store and back and the engine's not getting hot and the oil's not getting hot, what basically do you need to do with your oil? Do you need to change it more often, or does Joe Gibbs does Driven Oil have a solution for that for even the soccer mom in her little minivan that the engine never gets hot? Would it be good for them to run one of these oils?
we really don't have anything for the soccer mom necessarily. But, you know, what you're saying is true in that if you do a lot of short trip driving, those miles actually count more because it's harder on the oil.
Now that you know how to choose the proper oil from Driven Racing Oils, don't forget to check out our other videos with our Lake Speed Jr. interview.